panel session main panel session for the constitution making stream class. Please, can anybody hear me? Can you confirm if you can hear me? Okay. We all need to turn on our cameras. My first question is to God's favor. Can you describe the constitution making process in your research country? Can you hear me, please? So can anybody hear me? Can anybody turn on their microphone and tell me if they can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
God's favor, can you hear me? Okay, oh yeah, please can you describe the constitution making process in your research country?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Dr. Kunuji says he can't hear you.
Please let me come on again. Hello, please can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
You're very audible.
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Is God's favor on the call? Please, if you're on the call, can you unmute your mic and speak? Okay, Koreas, please describe the constitution making process of the research country.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Gafar Korea, a constitutional making intern at the Lex Letter Center. And my project country was Zimbabwe. So the constitution making process in Zimbabwe, I focused on the constitution making process of 2009 to 2013. So this process came as a result of political crisis which happened in Zimbabwe during the 2008 elections. The parties had come together, ZANU-PF and other parties had come together to form the Global Political Agreement, which established an inclusive government and mandated the creation of a new constitution. Then a parliamentary select committee on constitution, the COPAC, was formed in order to conduct public consultations and the drafting of a constitutional text. This process took place within a matter of months, and then there were consultations made to the public. There was public participation done to allow the citizens of Zimbabwe to have a say in their constitution making process. However, this constitution making process was plagued with a variety of problems, ranging from elite domination to the lack of an independent constitutional court. Also, there was also the issue of political intimidation by certain parties which were involved, which basically allowed for the constitution making process to not be a model from a constitution making process. I compared the constitution making process in Zimbabwe to that of the constitution making process in South Africa. The South Africa's constitution making process, on the other hand, that is between 1990 to 1996, was carefully structured and legally constrained. It followed a two-stage transition. First, there was the negotiated constitutional principles between the multiple parties in South Africa at that point. It is to be noted that both South Africa and Zimbabwe created these constitutions, which I speak on, after a moment of political crisis. In Zimbabwe, it was after an electoral and political crisis. Meanwhile, in South Africa, it was after the apartheid. So the parties had come together to form a multi-party negotiating process. and created a Convention for Democratic South Africa, the CODESA. Second, they created an interim constitution. This interim constitution provided for an elected constitutional assembly to draft the final constitution. Crucially, this final text complied with the binding constitutional principles and was subject to certification by a constitutional court. It is also to be noted that when it comes to political participation, the political participation methods were seen as model in South Africa. The citizens and the persons of South Africa were consulted when creating the constitution making process. Political participation was a crucial thing in the constitution making process of the 1999 South African Constitution.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Can you give us in details the modes of public participation used in both Zimbabwe and South Africa, and tell us to what extent each of them were effective?
Thank you for that question. So in Zimbabwe, political participation was seen as formally extensive. Now, when I say formally extensive, it means that on paper, the plan put on paper for political participation was seen as something that could work out, was seen as a process that could yield effective and positive results. However, when these processes started, they were met by an array of problems. Firstly, even though the public participation process was wide and there was outreach towards urban and regional areas, and it was framed as people driven, meaning that there were people who were conducting these processes and there were people who were giving the answers. So it was by the people, done for the people. However, one of the problems that I mentioned before was the problem of political intimidations. Members of the security sector who had been at the top of the political chain had influenced the public perception of people, the public ideas that people were bringing forth, because they wanted to keep their power. They were the elite who wanted to retain power. And so if persons in the public had given dissenting opinions as to their rule, or had given opposing opinions as to what the security sector had wanted, it would have been detrimental. So they took measures to actively involve themselves in this process by political intimidation. Some of these measures were even seen to be human rights violations, particularly in rural areas, and this undermined the authenticity of the political participation. The citizens were sometimes instructed on what positions to express and what particular things to say when they were questioned about their ideas. And also, dissenting voices were being quashed and they faced intimidation. So if you had an issue with the political situation at that point, if you had an issues with the elites dominating, if you had given a dissenting voice or a dissenting opinion, definitely that opinion will have been quashed. So this brought down the level of public participation. This brought down the level of authentic public political participation. On the other hand, in South Africa, which is seen as a model constitution making process, the public participation process was seen as exemplary. Now, the Constitutional Assembly of South Africa reported over 2 million submissions done by the members of the South African public. And it is estimated 73% of the South African population submitted political participation, political ideas. And also, technology played a very big and important role when it came to the public participation of the members in South Africa. Participation was structured, it was protected, and it was meaningfully incorporated into the political crafting process. It is to be noted that when it came to the outreach programs done by the government towards the people, they were done in the 5 main languages of South Africa. So it reached a variety of people, it reached an array of South African citizens. There were also jingles on the radio. There are jingles which played. So in rural areas that did not understand written work, that were not as literate as people in the urban areas, they got to listen to radio jingles. There was also a website created to upload submissions and to track to see how the submissions were being reviewed. So technology made things easier. There were also television commercials which enabled the citizens to understand the constitution-making process itself and how to submit their ideas. The participation was very, very substantive, and it yielded a very positive result. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that response. So can you elaborate on the political atmosphere that led up to the constitution-making processes of both countries? And also, in your opinion, can you say the political atmosphere kind of prepared the ground for an effective constitution-making process? That I mean, a public participatory constitution-making process.
Okay, thank you for that question. In Zimbabwe, the political climate at that point was after the 2008 electoral crisis. So you can imagine, it is to be imagined rather, that the country was in disarray, that there were not a lot of free speech done by persons who were dissenting to the government. So in creating a new constitution, there was heavy elite dominance, as I stated before, and heavy political interference. Because at that time, at that moment, the people who were even in charge of the constitution making process were also the elites in the country. They were the people who were in charge of the country. So these persons were able to, metaphorically, they were able to stick their fingers into the food, into the mouths of the citizens of the country to prevent them from saying certain things which might be against the polity itself. Because the elites were doing this process solely for themselves. When you look at it, it could have been seen as them doing it for selfish reasons because they still wanted to remain in power. So even if a new constitution was created, these are the persons who still wanted to remain in power. So they had gone through measures and processes to ensure that they continue to remain in power by interfering with the ideas that the people were bringing forth, even interfering in the way political outreach was done, not allowing outreach to reach certain areas that they know that there will be dissenting opinions. And even when dissenting opinions were given, they were intimidated and they were crushed. There was use of security sectors members, such as the police force, such as the people in the armies, the people in the military. Basically, these people were able to intimidate persons to prevent any form of dissenting opinion. So this political climate greatly dampened the process of ensuring that a constitution which was for the people was created. On the other hand, in South Africa, the political participation process, in South Africa, on the other hand, the atmosphere was a very good atmosphere. Even though this was after apartheid, which was the segregation of people of color versus white people, they had apartheid had come to an end, and South Africa has had its first black president, Nelson Mandela, at that point. So even though the political climate was still kind of unstable because people were not sure how this new integrated society was going to function, the people who were at the bottom of the chain, that is the black people, the people of color, they had the opportunities to express themselves. It is also to be noted that the people of color were a significant population in South Africa. They had more numbers than the white people, the non-people of color, or the people of non-color. Okay. So these persons, the people of color, were a larger majority in South Africa at that point, and they were given the opportunity and the chance to be able to speak up, to have a say in the government. This was their one chance. This was for some of them, this was their first opportunity to have a say in how a constitution was being made, in how an important aspect of government was going to affect their lives. So even though the political climate was very tense, and also it could have been seen as very racist at that point because there were a lot of elite white people who didn't like the situation as it was. So these people had the opportunity to express themselves, that is the black people. So they did not take that opportunity for granted. So even though the political climate could have been said to be a bit unstable or shaky, these people did not allow the political climate to dampen their enthusiasm to participate in the constitution making process. Also, the measures of political participation used by the South African government allowed for this process to be smooth, from the public participation process to also the constitutional court, which served as an independent body reviewing the draft of the constitutions brought forth. Also, the interim constitution that was created in 1993 that served as a sort of review body. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. Yes, as you pointed out, the key difference between the South Africa and Zimbabwe constitution making process, political atmosphere was that in South Africa was a time for freedom. They've been in slavery, less yes, and apartheid for several years, and it was a time for more or less like freedom. And yes, it was a time for Black people to finally have the power to express their opinions in matters of government and other important national matters. And so yes, that also prepared. That was even the major decisive factor in ensuring the political atmosphere was well prepared for an inclusive constitution making process. And yes, that was the major factor. And also, this ensured that even though there were some white people, like white elites, which were even still in power, who did not want the political process to be inclusive, the enthusiasm of the people, as you mentioned, ensured that public participation was the order of the day in the constitution making process. So thank you very much for that answer. Jessica, please, can you give us an overview of the constitution making process of your research country? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jessica, and my research country was Uganda. Uganda got its independence in 1962, and from 1962 to 1986, it was deeply rooted in conflicts between political leaders and political parties. I will be focusing on the 1986 process, constitution making process, the uprising of the national resistance movement. So in 1986, national resistance movement rose into power, and it enacted the Statute Number 5 of 1988. This Statute Number 5 of 1988 created the Constitutional Assembly, and the role of the Constitutional Assembly was to draft a constitution that was based on consensus. This means that it has to carry out aggressive public participation, consulting the people, getting information from them of what they want the constitution to look at. And afterwards, this Constitutional Assembly handed over this draft to the Constituent Assembly that was created by the Uganda Constituent Assembly Statute of 1993. This Constituent Assembly Statute also gave room for elections or individual based on their merits at county level. And these individuals, 284 of them in total, formed the Uganda Constituent Assembly. This assembly was to draft, it was to criticize, it was to debate the draft given by the Constitutional Assembly, as well as enact and promulgate and submit to the Minister of the Uganda Constituent Assembly. And then afterwards, the constitution was enacted. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that response. How are women included in the constitution making process of Uganda?
As stated earlier, the Uganda constitution was to be made by consensus. This means that it needed the opinion of every single person in the Ugandan society. This includes women and minority groups. So women, well, they were part of the Uganda Constituent Assembly, 39 of them out of the 284, and 39 of them, they were indirectly elected by the Women's Council, so as to give them a place in the body that will be debating and will be enacting the Uganda Constitution. It's all aimed at making the process inclusive.
What about South Africa?
So the South African constitution process began in the early 90s. The process was aimed at resolving all of South Africa's issues from its post-apartheid era. The process began by the Convention of Democratic South Africa, several parties forming the Multi-Party Negotiation Forum, 26 parties in total that kickstarted the entire constitution-making process, and they formulated the interim constitution of 1993. And then that interim constitution of 1993 established constitutional principles, the constitutional courts, and the constitutional assembly. This constitutional assembly, individuals were elected based on their political parties, and then these political parties duly represented, elected into parliament for the purpose of creating a constitution, debated, gathered, engaged in public participation, gathered opinion from the people, and then passed it on to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court's sole responsibility was to check whether this draft constitution complied with the 34 constitutional principle that was contained in the interim constitution, and afterwards it was enacted.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So my question to you was, how were women included also in the constitution making process of South Africa? Can you give us details of how they were included, and also how other minority groups like the chieftaincy, title holders groups, and other civil society groups were included also in the process?
So the Constitutional Assembly also had women representing, one of which also forming committees that supported the Constitutional Assembly, one of which was Christina Mori. The whole aim of the Constitutional Assembly was to be inclusive, was to gather opinion. So across every level, down to the rural level, they gathered opinion from the people, minority groups, political leaders, did civic education, public sensitization, telling the people, asking people what they want. They did constitutional talks, trying to reach every single person, down from the top to the bottom, the illiterate persons to elicit their opinion of what the constitution should say, what the constitution should do, what they wanted in the constitution.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. So one way women were included in the South African constitution making process was by the written submissions they also made to the assemblies. So they made written submission in newspaper, which was also considered by the constituent assembly body. Also, can you tell us the legal basis for the constitution making process of Uganda and also of that of South Africa?
Okay, the law was used to start. I would say the law was the catalyst for the constitution making process both in Uganda and South Africa. As stated earlier, the Uganda constitution making process began with the enactment of Statute Number 5 of 1988. And it was this statute that created the Constitutional Assembly. This statute stated the aims and objectives of the Constitutional Assembly, which was to get a consensual view of what the people would want the constitution to be. And then hereafter, the Uganda Constituent Assembly Statute was enacted, the Uganda Constituent Assembly Statute of 1993. And then this statute gave the basis for election. They stated the process that the Uganda Constituent Assembly was to follow. In South Africa, on the other hand, the entire process was started by the interim constitution of 1993. It was this constitution that gave the principles that the constitution to be enacted would have to comply with before it would be made binding on everybody. This interim constitution also created the Constitutional Assembly. This interim constitution gave deadlock mechanisms that would be used if they were unable to reach a consensus on the draft of the constitution. This constitution literally gave them a step-by-step basis that they were to follow throughout the constitution making process.
Okay, thank you very much. So to what extent was technology used in the South African constitution making process? And in your opinion, how can technology further democratize constitution making processes of countries when they want to ensure the public is included in the process?
Okay, in South Africa, especially, there was a web page. So first of all, there was newsletters that were distributed every fortnight, and then from their newsletters, there was publicity about the web page. And then it was recorded that about 6,655 persons visited the web page, and people also made submissions on the web page and also tracked their submissions. Technology would play a very big role in democratization, to play a very big role in eliciting public opinion. It will help you consensus faster by the creation of digitalized polls, through the use of artificial intelligence to filter controversial issues, consensual issues, or issues that the people have giving a very obvious consensual submissions on. So it will help build consensus, it will help reach people, but it has its downside in public participation, being that it will be prone to cyber attack. It means that it could be easily hacked, and the whole process would then have to dance to the tune of the person who has hacked it.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. And like you rightly mentioned, technology also has its downside because you've mentioned something about its filtering bias. Who will decide what is a biased opinion? That could be also used by manipulated by political elites to prevent the inclusion of opinions they feel that are not in line with their own agenda. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, is Joy Zadi here? Jessica, please, do you know if Joy Zadi has joined the call? Okay. Corey, please, can you tell us
He
legal
hasn't.
basis of what did you say?
I said he has not joined the call.
Okay, thank you. Corey, please, can you tell us the legal basis of the constitution making process of Zimbabwe? Hello, Corey.
Sorry, sorry, the network is lagging, so it took a while for me to hear what you said. But I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so the legal basis of the constitution making process in Zimbabwe, like I said before, the process took place between 2009 and 2013. So what was created was a body known as the Parliamentary Select Committee on the Constitution. And this was the body that was tasked with conducting public consultation and drafting the text. It should be noted that there was no existence of a constitutional court because the key importance of the constitutional court, as seen in South Africa, is an independent body that would aid in the constitution making process by reviewing the constitutional draft brought about and making sure that the process itself complies with the principles in the constitution, in the interim constitution, and also complying with the draft itself complies with the 34 principles that are in the interim constitution. So in Zimbabwe, there was no interim constitution created. So there was not any form of draft constitution that was compared to. There was also no constitutional court that was reviewing the constitution making process and also reviewing the drafts that were brought forth. All that was there was just a parliamentary select committee. And this parliamentary select committee was even still controlled by elites, and it did not provide for binding constitutional principles or independent judicial certification of a final draft.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that response, but it didn't quite answer my question. So when we mean legal basis, we mean what is the legal document that served as the command that gave the command that issued the command for the constitution making process to be started. For instance, now we mentioned interim constitution. The interim constitution in South Africa was agreed by both parties, and it was a legal document that said, okay, for instance, we have a law, okay, we want to create an hospital or a university, for instance. For instance, for the University of Lagos, there's the University of Lagos Act. That's kind of legal basis for the creation of the University of Lagos. So for Zimbabwe, it was the Global Political Agreement. That's what gave the ZANU and other political parties the legal basis to start the constitution making process. Okay, so what was the major issues the Constituent Assembly discussed? Like, what were the major issues they addressed, both in South Africa and your research country?
Okay, so in Zimbabwe, the Constituent Assembly discussed the new, like because this was after a political crisis. So they discussed how a new government, like how the constitution was going to, well, technically how the constitution was going to function in a new political climate, because the parties had already come together to create an inclusive government through the global political agreement. So the constitution was going to focus, apart from focusing on fundamental human rights and other tenets that the constitution should other tenets that the constitution should include. They're also discussing how the constitution was going to function in the new government that they were going to form, because this was after a political climate. In South Africa, the Constituent Assembly discussed, apart from fundamental human rights, also discussed how the constitution was going to function in a new climate, in a climate that had an inclusive government of both whites and black people mixing and functioning in government alike.
Okay, thank you. So from your opinion, can you say the negotiations and the activities of the Constituent Assembly was enough to resolve these issues that the countries faced?
Okay, in Zimbabwe, the answer would be no, because the Constituent Assembly was still made up of political elites who were driven by their own selfish desires. So even if, like, and they were also, the political participation process was even heavily intimidated. So even when drafts were brought forth before the committee on constitution making, when these drafts were brought forth, they still put in their own ideas because they still wanted a constitution that would favor their own political views and their political ideas. On the other hand, in South Africa, the I think the process was actually fairly good. I think it helped with the political climate in general, and the things that were discussed helped with the political making process itself.
Okay, thank you. In your opinion, can you state how, to what extent the election into the Constituent Assembly, the election of members into the Constituent Assembly affected the democratization of the process?
Okay, in South Africa, the members of the Constituent Assembly were elected from different parts of the country. So we have individuals who are also representing their own cultural and political views, because they had come to represent a group of people. So these persons, even women being included, because there were also women who were even handpicked to be in the Constituent Assembly, and their ideas helped with the creation of the constitution, because they had different varying ideas about things which particularly affected women in their daily lives. There were also persons who were professionals in their sectors. There were also persons who were professors from universities. There were also persons who were very, very vast in political making process. There were also external consultations done. So these persons aided the constitution making process. Then on the other hand, in Zimbabwe, like I stated before, the elites just filled up the seats in the Constituent Assembly, because everything that they wanted the outcome to be something which greatly favored them, and not necessarily favoring the persons, the public, rather. They wanted something which would favor them personally. So this affected the outcome, because they had an outcome which was very unstable and favored the political elite heavily.
Okay, thank you very much. In your opinion, what electoral process do you think is best to be adopted in constitution making processes to prevent elite domination?
So in this process, the electoral process that can be done would be a sort of representative process, whereby persons within a particular fraction or particular state within a country would select individuals who will represent them in a constituent assembly. This would be a sort of indirect democracy. So these persons will be able to get to the constituent assembly and voice the opinions of the people that they are there to represent. For example, if a person was selected from no, for example, the way a parliamentary system of government works, where we have individuals who are voted in by the public, which represents the interest of the people that voted them in at their parliament. So that kind of form would make a better constitution-making process because we have individuals who are there to represent and vote on the ideas of the people who they are representing.
Okay, thank you very much. Jessica, can you give your opinion on that question?
I would say that a recommended way through which election should be done is on partisan basis. This would allow for political pluralism, an environment that accommodates political ideas and diverse political views. The downsides, the negative, the demerits of not having partisan political basis could be gotten from Uganda's outcome of the constitution making process in Uganda. As we see in Uganda, the members of the Constitutional Assembly were elected on non-partisan basis. This means that these individuals were elected on individual merits at sub-county levels. And then it has been argued that it created a pseudo democracy, a fake democracy. When political parties are involved in the constitution making process, there will be debate. There will be each party trying to push forward their supporters' view or what they believe that their supporters will want. So partisan basis for election is my recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. While there are no one-size-fits-all approach to electoral processes for election into constituent assembly and other drafting bodies, it's important that such bodies take account of the political climate of the country, number one, and also ensure that civil society groups are included, probably like creating special seats for civil society groups and also for other minority groups. Thank you very much. Kowiat, please can you speak about the use of referendum in Zimbabwe for the constitution making process? Hello, Kowiat, can you hear me?
So yes, I can hear you, sorry. So in Zimbabwe's constitution making process, for the 2009-2013 constitution making process, there was not a heavy use of referendum. But however, in the 1997 Zimbabwe constitution making process, when there were calls for democratic reforms and a new constitution, the government had embarked rather on a constitutional commission which did consultations. And then at the end of the consultations in 2000, a national referendum was conducted in which the people, the citizens, voted yes or no as regards to the president at that point, Robert Mugabe, as regards to the new constitution that he proposed. And the citizens of Zimbabwe had voted no.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want you to elaborate on how it was effective in ensuring that Mugabe's wishes were not enforced on the people.
Okay. In any process, in any democratic process, the wants of the citizens, the wants of the citizenry, the public, is one of the most essential things in ensuring that a democratic process exists. So the voting of no by the citizens of Mugabe prevented whatever political agenda that Robert Mugabe was trying to enforce on the people. Because at this point, there was a serious economic decline. And even the calls for a new constitution was done by both the citizenry and trade unions. There was clamors for democratic reforms. And also, the constitutional commission that was created was filled, the seat of that commission was filled by supporters of Mugabe, people who would have listened and agreed to his every whim and every need that he had wanted. So the citizenry voting no showed that the real power of the government did not even belong to the president Mugabe himself, but to the people, and they did not want the and they did not want the ideas of the political elites controlled by Mugabe to be enforced in their everyday lives.
Okay, thank you very much. Jessica, can you tell us the role of compromise in in fostering the constitution-making process of South Africa?
So
Hello?
it is stated that the South African process was a negotiated compromise. This means that, to some extent, political parties, leading or major political parties, had to give up their stance just to allow what was good, what was generally consensually good for the people to stay. For example, the whites, the whites, the whites and the ANC, the ruling party at that time, wanted to create a constitution. Since the ANC was a ruling party, it could simply have just amended whatever constitution was in power at that time and turned the parliament into a constituent assembly in order to create a constitution. However, it took another route, a compromise route, and it allowed elections, created a multi-party negotiating forum, and then elections via the interim constitution of 1993 into parliament. And then it was that parliament that served as the constituent assembly, allowing several other political parties to play a role in the constitution making process.
Okay, thank you very much. Koreat, please, can you speak on that too?
And sorry, could you repeat the question again so I can? Yeah.
Okay, I said, what role did compromise play in fostering the constitution-making process of South Africa?
Oh, of South Africa, South Sudan, Zimbabwe. So at that point, this was the post-apartheid point. And so the ruling elite at that point were the white people in society. And now apartheid was over. So there was a societal integration. And Black people would now begin to be involved in political processes, would now begin to have a say in how their country is being run. And then Nelson Mandela was the president of the country. So after the apartheid had come to an end, the ANC and the other political party had come together to form a compromise, to form a government that would both cater to the needs of the Black people and the needs of the white people. So this compromise aided aided the constitution making process. It also allowed for a slightly more stable political climate because we have two different political parties with clashing ideologies, with clashing ways of life. So they had to come together, come to a compromise. Compromise also played an important role when the constitutional draft was being created because we had ideas that were being put forth by different kind of different people from all walks of life, people from high income and people from low income, different from people from various sectors. So when their ideas and views were submitted to the Constituent Assembly, they had to, sift through all the ideas that were bringing front and come to a compromise that would be a middle ground that would be satisfying for both the for people, for all the people in the country, for people in the different sectors. So there was also negotiated constitutional principles that were agreed upon. And this negotiated constitutional principle is what even led to the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, which served as the Constituent Assembly in South Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. So like both of you mentioned, in the constitution-making process of South Africa, compromise was utilized and it was majorly used by the ANC, the ruling party, the major political party that played the major role, yes, in the constitution-making process. So they ensured that they allowed other political parties' ideas to be incorporated in the process. For instance, they had to concede to the wishes of the white government in terms of the kind of mode the constitution making process should follow. And also they ensured that other minor parties were included and they didn't just discard them. So thank you very much. So the next question would be, please, Jessica, please discuss the role of the Constitutional Court in details in the role the Constitutional Court in South Africa played in the constitution making process and how it ensured that the process was more democratic.
Okay, pursuant to the provisions of the interim constitution of 1993, the major role of the Constitutional Court was to ensure that the draft submitted by the Constituent Assembly abided by the 34 principles given in the interim constitution. This meant that if this draft constitution did not follow the 34 principles, it would have to go back again to be debated and scrutinized. And that was exactly how it played out. The Constituent Assembly submitted a draft constitution to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court sent it back to the Constituent Assembly. This was because it did not abide by the 34 principles given in the interim constitution. For example, the interim constitution gave a principle on supremacy of the constitution. However, the draft constitution that was submitted at that time immunized the Labour's Rights Act as regards the right to lockout. And then this meant that the Labour's Rights Act would not be subservient, or rather, would not be, the constitution would not rule over the Labour Rights Act as regards any decisions. So it sent it back to the Constituent Assembly, drafted and submitted again. And also, there were parties that did not reach a compromise, that did not feel that a consensus was reached during the debating and scrutinization and the drafting at the Constituent Assembly. And then this party expressed trust in the Constitutional Court, stating that even though we did not reach a compromise here, when we get to the Constitutional Court, we are going to debate this issue. They are going to check whether it complied with the principles given in the interim constitution. So the Constitutional Court played a very huge role in ensuring that the 34 principles that was given in the interim constitution was complied with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So in your opinion, what should have Uganda done differently to ensure a more participatory process?
So Uganda's popular participation was basically consultative. This means that the opinions of the people was just to inform the constitution making process. It would have done, Uganda constitution making process would have been better if it created an external independent mechanism for checking if the constitution that was enacted abided with the picture they had, or complied with the picture they had in mind at the initial stages of the creation of a constitution. What Uganda had in mind was to create a consensual constitution. This means that it was to elicit the opinion of the people on a consensual basis. However, the outcome was different. So if Uganda had an external mechanism independent of the national resistance movement that was to checkmate this constitution, that was to ensure that this constitution would elicit the opinion of the people and not just inform the constitution making process, then it would have done a whole lot better. And then also, if Uganda had allowed partisan basis, allowed the representatives, or rather members of the Constitutional Assembly, to be elected on a party basis, it would also have improved this inclusiveness and allowed public participation on an increased level in the constitution making process.
Okay, thank you very much. You kept mentioning external mechanism outside of the NRC. Apart from Constitutional Court, what other external body can a constitution making process utilize to ensure that there's compliance with the ideal picture of the constitution they want?
I would say that apart from a constitutional court, they could also have used a team of technical experts. That means professionals that are very versed in the field of constitution making, and then also they could have made use of referendum, a yes or no vote as to whether or not the constitution was what the people wanted. The team of experts and the use of referendum was one of the deadlock mechanisms that was created by the interim constitution of 1993 in the South African constitution making process. So if Uganda, apart from not having a constitutional court, or if Uganda did not want to make use of a constitutional court, they could have made use of referendum, or they could have created a team of experts.
Okay, thank you very much. But also, don't you think the use of either a constitutional court, a referendum, or any other mechanism would still be subject to the major ruling party complying with, like, deciding to abide by principles of constitutionalism? Like, if they have to want to be subject to those people and listen to their views and obey whatever rulings they give. What's your opinion on that?
I believe that if the constitutional courts or whatever process that they would have adopted as an external mechanism was independent of the national resistance movement, it would have made a whole lot difference. But there is no say as to what the NRM could have done. I mean, they made the entire process revolve around them. Even the independent bodies like the Constitutional Assembly and the Constituent Assembly and the Constitutional Commission revolved around them and the democratization policies that they had made. So I feel that if these external mechanisms were also made subject to the rules and to the policies given by the national resistance movement, it would have made no difference.
Okay, thank you. So my statement was that it is still subject. What I was trying to bring out was that whether we have a constitutional court or we use a referendum or any other process, it's still subject to the fact that the ruling party needs to abide and needs to obey whatever rulings those independent bodies give. So that's the essence of what I was saying. So it's important that the spirit. It's important that the spirit of constitutionalism is present in the constitution making process. That means people must abide by the principles of the constitution, and people must be ready to obey whatever was said by any established body, by the established body in the constitution making process. Corey, please, can you tell us what your country could have done differently to ensure the process was more democratized?
Okay, thank you for that question. So first of all, Zimbabwe will have created an independent constitutional court, similar to the constitutional court in South Africa. If the constitutional court, which was able to review the draft brought forward to determine whether or not the draft would be satisfactory as an actual constitution, if this process was done, it would have prevented the constitution that was created that did not adequately reflect the views of the people. Then also, there would have been a decrease in elite dominance because the global political agreement, which was done by the ruling parties, would have, well, yes, the agreement would have been done by ruling parties, but this process would have been heavily scrutinized. This process would have had other independent bodies overseeing it because the elites were the ones who decided to make the constitution. So if there was a sort of independent body or even an external body which was there guiding the process, apart from the constitutional court, guiding the processes that were done, a separate body that was independent and separate, this process would have been easier and it would have prevented the elite domination. Additionally, if there was sanctions, if there were punishments for elite interference and political domination, then there will have been lesser occurrences of it. If a constitutional court or an interim constitution had stated that there would have been punishments for any sort of political intimidation, then the levels of political intimidation will have greatly decreased. Also, there should have been an interim constitution which had the principles that will have guided the constitution making process itself and also guided the draft in determining what part of the constitution could be seen as valid and what other parts could have been seen as invalid.
Okay, thank you very much. How can a body be made independent, in your opinion?
A body can be made independent if it has no form of political interference. For example, It's always said that an independent judiciary is one of the pillars of a democracy, meaning that the judiciary must not be subject to any form of interference from any other branch of government, any arm of government, or even any private individual itself. So for anybody to be independent, that means it must be free of any form of intervention. The people in that body, the people functioning in that body must be persons who may not be easily swayed by any form of interference or bribes. It must be persons who have strong, good moral principles. Then also there must be checks and balances. So in case there's any form of interference that is seen within that body, there must be a check, there must be a way to ensure that whatever sort of disease is causing that interference would be removed to ensure that the independence of that body remains strong.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very good response. Jessica, how can a body be made independent to ensure popular participation in the constitution-making process?
As Kuyat said,
Apart from what Kuyat said,
okay,
and steps you think they should take, specific steps also.
So I believe that for a body to be made independent, a step that should be taken is to create like a rule, something like a constitution, or rather an act that would govern the entire process, that independent body, the step by step analysis of the steps that the independent body should take, so that in case it moves out of what they had in mind when it was created, they would be able to sideline it with what this act is saying and what they are doing in order to achieve the results that they had in mind when the independent body is created.
Okay, thank you very much. From your opinion and from your research, how can public participation be manipulated, used by apart from manipulation by elites?
Public participation can be manipulated by a ruling political party, because the constitution is a document that would decide the future balance of power, and there are persons who are power hungry that will want to remain in power, like the current president of Uganda. And so these political parties, or rather this ruling political party, will want to manipulate the entire process. For example, making sure that the submissions of the people remain to just inform the constitution making process and not really reflect in the constitution itself. So a major ruling political party can influence the political making process, manipulate the public opinion of the people, or ensure that the opinion of the people just informs the process rather than reflect in the constitution itself.
Sorry, I lost you for a bit. Please, can you come again?
I said that another way public participation can be manipulated is by a political party or a ruling political party that would manipulate the opinions of the people, so in that it doesn't reflect in the constitution itself, but rather just inform on what the constitution should be, or what they would have wanted the constitution to be. And so that, because the constitution is a document that decides future balance of power, and there are power hungry individuals, power hungry political parties that would want to remain in power for quite a long time. For example, the current Uganda president, who after this term would be in power for 40 years. So the opinions of people would no longer reflect in the constitution because that was what was wanted, but rather it would just inform the constitution making process as of what they wanted or what they would have wanted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Koriat, in your opinion, how many years should the constitution making process be conducted to ensure that it still reflects the spirit of the people? And it's not just that it is what has been used for 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that is still that is still deciding the lives of the people?
Okay. Realistically, the answer would be it depends. Because when it comes to a sensitive process such as constitution making, there's no set time that can be given, because this is a process that is very long, and it's a process that would undergo a lot of mini processes inside. However, we cannot say however long it takes, because that's a very open answer. So I think realistically, or theoretically rather, the process should take at least a year or two, or even 3 years at most, because there would be the time needed to create a sort of, the parties would have
Sorry,
to come
Korea.
together
Sorry to interrupt you. My
interrupt.
question
Okay.
was, how frequent should the constitution making process
Oh, how
take place
frequent?
in a country? Yes.
Sorry, I thought you meant how long. Okay, how frequent? Well, every 50 years should be fine, because when after 50 years, after like that's like half a millennium. Okay, so after 50 years, we have new individuals who will now become the electorate. We have a new set of people who will now be in power, different from the old set of people who have been in power, except the political elite is dominating throughout. But realistically, in any functioning democracy, we would have a new electorate, we have a new set of people. So I think after 50 years, this new set of people should be allowed to create a new constitution. Yes, ideas will be taken from the old constitution. Also, the constitution making process doesn't necessarily mean creating a new constitution. So the old constitution doesn't have to be scrapped. It could be amended to reflect the ideas and views of a new electorate, of a new government, of a new set of people in power. So every 50 years should be fine.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So we've come to the end of today's panel session. Dr. Kunoji, please, do you have any comments for us? Hello, sir. Please, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's panel session. Please have a good evening. Bye.